5 years, and before that I was a student at Sheffield Uni. So I was really hoping that we could do this in person today, to come back and visit the city, because I've not been back to Sheffield for a while. But Sheffield has a big place in my heart, so it's definitely one of my favourite places. So sad that we're not actually there and I can't come back for a visit, but hopefully soon. So that's my very, very brief introduction. I'm going to hand over to Stephen, who can tell us all about himself as well.
Hello, I'm Father Stephen. I'm the parish priest here in St John's in Leamington. I serve my curacy about half an hour from Sheffield, actually, in Worksop, a different diocese, but still not far from Sheffield. So I know the city well. I was appointed as an interim minister at St John's in 2016 with a particular remit to grow a congregation with 20 to 30s as a priority. South Leamington has the highest population, I believe, still of 20 to 30s in the Diocese of Coventry. So it's a good harvest, really.
Brilliant. Thank you. We're going to do a little tag team today. So as we go through the things that we're going to share, we're going to both be speaking and kind of leading you through what we're going to do. So kind of general basic overview for the morning is session 1, we're going to talk about the story of young adults ministry in our diocese over the last nearly 10 years. So how have we got to the point that we've got to with working with young adults? We're going to share some of the things that we've learned through the work that we've done, and then go into breakout groups to think about young adults in our own context. So that's session 1. Session 2, we're going to go into even more detail about the context that we've worked in. So Stephen's going to share a kind of case study of his church and all the things that have happened there. And then I'll share different examples from different contexts of young adults ministry. And then there's another chance for breakout groups. And then session 3, excuse me, which is our shorter session, we have a big long list of top tips for young adults ministry. So as our team, we put this together. These are tried and tested. I thought we'd got 20, but having looked the other day, we've actually got 30. So we've got 30 things that we have tried that we would love to share with you guys, which will work in different places and doing different things. So that's the quick run through of the morning. And I'm going to share screen and talk you through the slides, so we can send these slides out afterwards. Be able to see these after we've finished. Oh, that's at the end. That's not at the beginning. Sorry. There you go. I think as well, I have a slight lag this morning on my slides and myself. So I'm really sorry if there's a bit of a delay between the slide that you see and what I'm saying, but hopefully they will line up together at some point soon. So just to kind of launch in, really, young adults ministry. It's worth saying as well, these slides are really basic, so easy to follow, but really basic. And apologies if there's any spelling mistakes. And I did read through, but they may well be. So we've had a targeted approach to young adults ministry as a whole diocese, really since 2012. So coming up for 10 years now. All credit, or a lot of credit for this, goes to our previous Archdeacon Missioner. So previous Archdeacon Missioner had a real heart for young adults, really wanted to see 20s to 30s encouraged in their participation in the church, and especially into leadership positions in churches and across the diocese. So the root of this really was his heart to see younger adults participating more fully in church, and churches being a place that fosters that and encourages that as well. So that's sort of the root of some of this work, really. But in 2012, as a diocese, we were given church growth in deprived areas funding, which is a kind of pre-SDF funding from my understanding of it. So kind of just before SDF and the Church Commissioners released funding, which could only be used in the kind of most deprived parts of our diocese. So one of the things that we chose to do with that was to offer leadership training to young adults in those churches. So we put on a leadership training scheme, and 20s to 30s from our kind of most deprived areas came along, and I was part of that leadership training scheme. So at the time I was working in a church in Leamington, in a pretty tough area, and so I was invited to join that. And through that, young adults started to meet together from different churches in different contexts and do leadership training. So it was fairly small. There was about 15 of us, I think, on the scheme in the first cohort, and that worked really well. But from there, we thought, what else could we do in terms of encouraging young adults? So that scheme involved about 25 churches. We have 250 churches in our diocese, so we wanted to expand out and see what else we could do. And then in 2015, we were awarded strategic development funding for our Accelerate project. So it's worth saying there are two halves to the Accelerate project. One is about growing healthy churches, which our colleague Tim heads up. And the other is about 20s to 30s ministry, which I've had the privilege of heading up for the last 6 years. So obviously going to talk about the 20s to 30s side. So we basically started to think what could we do and how could this work? And what we decided to do was to create a team of 10 20s to 30s development leaders. So this is a mixture of lay and ordained people, which was and continues to be an interesting mix as having a team with both lay and ordained. The remit of the 20s to 30s development leader really is to go and make disciples of 20s to 30s. So however that looks, however that might work, that's what those people are doing and what those guys have been doing for the last 6 years. We decided to base the development leaders in quite a wide variety of churches, which was a deliberate choice on our part and a deliberate move from us, because one of the main remits of the project was to learn about young adults in the Church of England. So if we're going to look at the Church of England, we want to cover the whole broad spectrum of styles of church and size of church and location of church. So we quite deliberately pick churches that look quite different, feel quite different, are in different areas. So the churches that have had and have development leaders, some are more urban, some are more rural, some are larger, some are smaller, some had some young adults to start off with, some had no young adults at all, some are more traditional in style, and some are not. So it made it almost a little bit harder because of the variety of churches, but we've learned a huge amount. So it was definitely worth looking at those churches. How we picked the churches to put the development leaders in, there were a few criteria. So as Father Stephen mentioned about the population of his parish, we looked at the census statistics and saw the parishes that had the most 20s to 30s living in them. Because we thought, if we're going to put a 20s to 30s development leader in a parish, they need a fighting start with at least some young adults living there. So we wouldn't have put a development leader in a parish that had no young adults living there. So we looked at the ones that have got quite a high proportion of young adults in the parish. Also looked at churches that were willing to give something a go, because this was quite new, quite pioneering work, and we needed churches that were willing to say, we'll try stuff, and if it doesn't work, that's okay, but we're willing to try. So that's how we kind of base the churches, really, or pick the churches to base the development leaders. We have monthly team meetings as well, so everyone's based in a church, they're employed by the diocese, and sort of managed centrally and in the church. But coming together once a month for team meetings is really valuable, because we're sharing a lot of experiences and joys and struggles and frustrations, and praying with each other and doing some training. So I've just realised on that photo as well, Archbishop Justin Welby is not part of our team, but we don't have many team photos. So he came and spoke at a 20s to 30s event that we led. He's maybe an honorary member of the team, but yeah, we don't have many photos of the whole team, I'm afraid. So there you go, that's him. So that's how we kind of made up the team, really. And then at the start of 2016, the team really were let loose and started working in churches. Yeah, there's time for questions at the end. I realise I've rattled through that, but there's more to the story, but that's those are the important bits, really, of how the 20s to 30s team were built and what they've been doing. And yes, like I say, we've learned a lot over the last 6 years about young adults work. We're going to go into more detail later about some of the projects and some of the services and some of the groups that the guys actually ran. But for now, just going to share a little bit of an overview of some of the things that we've learned about working with young adults in churches. So, sorry, before we do that, here's some things that we have achieved as well. So being an SDF project, we've got quite a responsibility in terms of gathering information about the things that we're doing. So we've tried to get figures on things that we've done. One of the things we kept an eye on was how many 20s to 30s are in a leadership position in their church when they weren't this time last year. So that could be something like leading a small group, helping to lead worship, helping to lead kids groups, helping to run the food bank. But young adults that this time last year were not in a leadership position but are now. It's worth saying all these numbers are pre-COVID as well. So this is 2016 up until mid-2020. We've had to change what we're measuring in the last year, which I'm sure you understand that. So yeah, numbers of new 20s to 30s in new leadership positions. We've started quite a few small groups as well. So these are house groups, life groups, small groups, whatever you want to call them. They work really well for young adults. They really appreciate them and like being part of a small group. So we started quite a few small groups. We've started a number of new services. Now, this one is quite interesting because all of the development leaders are based in local churches. So we haven't had anybody that is not based in local church. So all of this work is coming out of an established church. Starting new services, could be a Sunday evening service, could be a midweek service, could be Taizé style prayer, anything like that. But it took us a while to get to the new services. Yeah, but a number of those have started as well. Residential weekends, so we've run 21 overall. Again, they work really well for young adults. And we find, especially students, they love going away and being fed for the weekend. So residential weekends work really well. Done quite a few of those. Done a number of kind of Alpha, Christianity Explored courses. So we think around 36, although that probably is more. Again, we've tried as hard as we can to get figures on things for SDF reports, but these take all these as, yeah, it could be more, could be less. So lots of starter courses, 193 social events. So young adults love a social event. We've done a lot of in amongst, we've had a good balance of social and spiritual input as well. So please read that as not just, we don't just do social events to attract young adults, but they do seem to love them. So we've done a lot of social events. And then again, the last statistic, this is taken with a big pinch of salt because it comes from our statistics for mission. And this is numbers of new 20s to 30s across the diocese. So our best guess is that since 2015, we've got 682 new 20s to 30s across the diocese. One of the things that we did when we started the project was to change our questions on the statistics for mission form so that we could get this information. So we can see how many people between the age of I think it's 18 to 40 have joined the church. This does not count for leavers as well. So this is not net growth. This is just new people. So that comes with that caveat of it looks like a great number and it is an amazing number because these are new young adults in the church, but it's not the full story. And we know that statistics for mission might not always be the most reliable source of information, at least in our diocese. I'm not saying that's the same for you guys. I'm sure you're really, really great at getting your information. But for us, we use it as best we can. So those are just some of the highlights really, and some of the kind of figures to share from the last few years. So yeah, looking at some of the things that we've learned. I'm going to talk through this slide and then Stephen's going to talk through the next one, so you don't just have to listen to me. So five things we've learned lots, but 5 things that are quite useful to share is young adults really appreciate community. So the social activities, like I mentioned, we've done a lot of those, but building relationships as well, going for a coffee, having a chat, doing life together, small groups. That's why we've started quite a few small groups, so kind of spiritual input in terms of small groups. Building those connections, having those conversations, we found have been really, really key for young adults. So community, anything you can do to build community. Obviously, the last year has been incredibly difficult in terms of having face-to-face contact and building relationships in that way. But generally, building community, great. They love it. Another thing we've learned as well is that young adults really respect authenticity and aren't afraid to question it. So, for example, if a church has a strapline of loving everyone in the community, and the young adult is at that church and they're not seeing that in action, they will ask why that's not happening. So what we say we are as a church, we need to be that as a church. So if we are a spirit-filled community, then that's what we need to be. And yeah, they will ask questions and we'll try and find out whether or not that is actually what the church is. So yeah, can be interesting to ask those kind of questions, but just to kind of recognize truth, recognize honesty, and recognize authenticity as well in churches. We've definitely done that. I'm going to ask Father Stephen to talk us through the next few things that we have learned.
I'm very happy to. It's worth commenting and mentioning the reason we haven't got any group photographs is because we never behave well enough to stand still at team meetings for a decent photograph. We're talking about authenticity. That's the real reason. Good. What am I talking about? Young adults no, have you changed it?
Yeah.
There we are. Good. So I can only ever talk about my context and my experience with any authenticity and authority. And so I was appointed here in 2016, and the congregation was very clear. They articulated that they wanted young adults in the congregation. Fast forward a couple of months later, and there was an almighty blowout at a planning event where we were trying to get young people into the church, and actually the people who had appointed me really weren't keen on the idea. And we can talk the talk, but actually if we want to see young people in our churches, we need to really mean that and understand what that means and the changes that will bring with it and the different energy and that will bring with it. And so the real need right at the outstart when we're talking about youth work and engaging young adults, whether or not this is something we really want. And of course, God wants it. And if we're praying about it, we will end up wanting it. But it's something we need to be honest with the leadership team, with our PCCs, with those who, for lack of a better word, are the old guards, and talk about what concerns are and what this will look like. That's really important as a church, that we make it part of our DNA, that we want to see young faces, that we want to see new people. And when we get them, when we have young people coming through our doors, what do we then do with them? Do we then stick them on a pew and tell them to sit quietly and to receive? Because what we've learned over the last, since I've been here 2016, 5 years, is that actually young people want to be involved. They've joined a church, it's telling them that they need to proclaim the good news, that they need to go and love their neighbour, they need to go and love their friends. They don't want to just then sit quietly on a Sunday morning. They want to be reading, they want to be praying, they want to be laying on of hands, they want to be leading things and being an active and participating member of the community that they have just joined. And I think Claire will talk, sorry, I'm so used to saying Claire, Kim will talk to us about how young adults engage with tradition.
Yes. So we are going to go into this point in more detail in the next session, but we really have honestly really experienced young adults being attracted to churches of all styles and of all sizes, and in all locations. And yeah, God's really blessed our work in that area in terms of growth of young adults, but we haven't found that there is one style that one style of church is attractive to young adults, but actually a wide variety of style and a wide variety of tradition is attractive to young adults. So if you are in a church and you think what we do might not be attractive to young adults, that might not be correct. So we have experienced this, and we do know that young adults like a different style. So take heart in that. If you don't think you're a studenty church, that's okay. Yeah, we're going to, in a minute, we're going to move into some breakout rooms and ask some questions. But just to kind of give a bit of context to the questions as well, is one of the things that we get asked a lot, or when we speak at kind of deanery synods or share sharing groups like this, quite often people say to me as well, we just don't have any young adults at our church. And okay, it's okay, tell me about the life of your church. What sort of stuff happens? What sort of stuff do you guys do? Oh, we run a messy church, or we work with the pupils at local school, that kind of thing. And so I say, oh, okay, so the parents that bring the kids to messy church, how old are they? Oh, they're all in their 20s, they're all in their 30s. Okay, interesting. So there are young adults probably connecting in with our churches that we might not necessarily realise that they have a connection to our church, because we might not see them on a Sunday morning. So that's your setup for the questions. But we're going to go into breakout groups and have a look at these two questions, which I'll pop in the chat so you can see. But what does young adults ministry currently look like in your context? And have you got young adults connecting with your church throughout the week and on Sunday morning? So we're just going to start with a bit of an observation of where are we at the moment with young adults. That'll be very different for everybody, but that's okay. So what have we got so far? Where are we up to at the moment? And let's just start thinking about the young adults that we've currently got. So I think I'm going to just stop sharing for a second. And I think Bill is going to put us into breakout groups for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and do some feedback. There's a bit of, I think we've got about 10 minutes for feedback and questions if people would like that. So I'll put those questions in the chat and over to Bill with breakout groups.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll do about 10 minutes. I've got groups of mostly of 4, a couple of 5, and we'll send you on your way and then call you back when there's about a minute to go. Okay, we'll see you then. Over to you. I think everyone's back now.
Brilliant. Great, welcome back everybody. Hopefully you've had a good time in your breakout groups. So we've got 10 minutes now before we head into a break, and there's not an expectation for every group to feedback, but if there is any feedback or questions that you have from your groups, then we've got a few minutes now that we can talk through that. So we're going to use the raise hand function. So if you have feedback or questions, please do digitally and physically raise your hand or make yourself known to us, so that we can see if we've got any hands raised. I'm trying to look, I can't see any. Oh,
David Eastwood. David Eastwood, I can see waving, and Toby. Okay, so we go David Eastwood first, since I spotted him first, and then go to Toby.
Great, yeah.
Just very simply, I dare say that many of us have got annual meetings coming up, and certainly I'm trying to encourage a small number of young people to be nominated. If you've got any advice as to how we might twist arms and get young people onto our PCCs, that would be much appreciated.
This is a very, very timely question, because on Monday evening I was asked if I would be church warden at my church. So I feel that. Yeah, I think personal approach, direct approach to people, and a recognition of gifts and skills. So yeah, I think it worked for me on Monday evening when I was asked if I would take on that role. So one of the difficulties, so I mean, we've painted quite a positive picture, and it has been an incredibly positive picture. We've faced a lot of challenges as well, as you will probably understand, and one of them has been around kind of attitudes towards younger people and younger leaders. So the incredible thing about encouraging young people into leadership positions in churches is that that is a good thing to do. But sometimes it's difficult for people that have done those roles for a number of years to perhaps pass them on. So I'd say managing that well is important too. But yeah, do ask young people to be involved, and encourage them. Yeah, flattery will get you everywhere. That's what worked for me this week. Yeah.
Toby,
Stephen, have you got anything you want to add?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just to re-echo what you said, Kim, really, that communication is key. I've always found that a direct pastoral approach is best. You know, we can often beat around the bush with things and people misunderstand what we're talking about, and that can lead to upset and confusion. I think, you know, not to go for the jugular, but at least being direct and honest with people and about expectations is always good.
Right. Should we go to Toby next?
Yeah.
Thanks. So some feedback and a question. Firstly, I'm vicar of two churches which are very contrasting. One of them is comparatively large church, which is in the charismatic evangelical tradition, worship band on a Sunday and so forth. The other is in the more Catholic tradition, robed choir, choral Eucharist. And it's the second that has the greater percentage of young adults in. In fact, on our comparatively small PCC, we've got a woman in her 20s and a woman in her 30s, whereas in the larger church, actually, I think the youngest PCC member is probably mid-40s. So that's that shows me that there's no one size fits all when you're working with young adults at all. The question that I have is really about whether we are able, we're treating young adults very much as a kind of a 20s and 30s sort of age bracket. But I wonder whether there's something about life stages that's the significant thing. And my church in Norton, many of the young adults that I work with are single mums in their early 20s, who, for instance, in residentials are going to work or not work for them in a very different way than 20s who are in a professional career and not yet had kids and so forth. So do we have to have different ways of working with young adults depending on life stage?
Yeah, I would say yes to that one. So yeah, 20s to 30s, something I should have said, sorry, it's a big remit and it covers quite a large number of different life stages. So a 21-year-old student could be in a very different stage of life to a 38-year-old parent with 3 children. Yes, being adaptable to those different stages is really key. So understanding that when we're talking about this age group, you're working with a wide variety of people with a wide variety of needs is really key. And we're going to go into a bit more detail of that in the next session, where we kind of go through some of the things that we've done with the different groups. But yeah, I think it's a really, really good observation. And really valid that a student weekend away is not going to work for anybody over the age of 25, probably. So yeah, adapting the approach to the different groups within that bracket is definitely important. Yeah. I realise I'm just jumping in with the answer. Stephen,
No,
any
no, well,
additions?
Just to play devil's advocate, I've taken a mum of 38 away to Rome for a week with 2 of her young children. And so,
Of course, yeah.
yeah, exactly, of course I have. Context is so varied and different, and it's really difficult to pigeonhole such a wide sweeping age bracket into any one particular style or what's going to work, or and what will work for a 21-year-old student in one context will work completely different for a 21-year-old student in a different context. And they might then be married, or they might have kids, they might not have kids, and still be 21. And so even within a single age, I think ultimately that we've learned is that as long as you're offering Jesus and you're offering community and you're offering authenticity and you're offering a warm and loving welcome and you're preaching the good news, the rest is up for grabs. It's about being intentional and about loving Jesus. And that's applicable to all age stages, whether 18 to 30. But it's about what's on your heart, I think.
Yeah. It ended the lesson. So it's good. No, really good. We've probably got time for one more question from Rick. Your hands up, Rick.
Kim, thanks ever so much. I just wanted to ask a question. You've used the importance of community, and it must be key, mustn't it? I suppose my question is a little bit what that community might look like, and what underlies that is the sense that, is that a community just for, if you like, 20s, 30s together, or is it, how do they also reflect the fact they're part of the bigger church family? And I sometimes feel a tension in that, because my sense is to encourage the young adults we have, I want to gather them, but then actually the rest of the church family so much benefit from them, and vice versa. And how we, now that may be a big issue you're going to come back to, but just what does community look like, if you like, for young adults?
I think that's a very mixed economy. I think both and or. So in context of St. John's, we do both. So we have particular groups that are for young adults and for children and teenagers, but we also encourage that they participate in the wider community, that they're coming to church events. And so everyone benefits. You know, you can have really focused input for particular demographics, but actually there is cross-fertilization across the entire church family. And so we aren't segmenting and putting people into ghettos, but actually we are offering the opportunity to foster and to nurture in particular context, but that then bleeds into the wider life of the church. Anything you'd like to add, Kim?
Yeah, all I'd add just on in terms of building community, a large part of the time spent by the 20s to 30s development leaders was doing one-to-one sessions with young adults. So going for a coffee, going for a walk. That in terms of kind of the practical, how do we build that community? That might just look like kind of one-on-one and 2 people, but that building relationship has really borne a lot of fruit. So I'd say that, everyone seems to spend a lot of time doing that especially with their young adults, but there absolutely is a place for intergenerational. So especially with some of the students, we found that they appreciate a kind of family feel in a church. So having some older, everyone's older than a student, having some people of a more senior persuasion that they can look up to and pray with them as well. So people that have gone through some of the life stuff that 20s and 30s might not have gone through yet. So if you're trying to buy a house and it's quite stressful, and you can go to someone that has been there and done that and can offer some reassuring words that the mortgage will all come together and all go through. So the kind of life experience stuff and sharing that has been really key, and that could be in a small group setting or in a church setting. But I think obviously we focused our work on 20s to 30s, but there's quite a lot of work to do with those of the more senior persuasion. I have to be careful how I say it, but people outside of that age bracket to be able to nurture and support younger generations as well. So especially in that kind of sharing life experience and praying and prayer support and pastoral support is really, really key.
That really resonates. We had a young couple came to our church for a while, and they actually approached me and said, could you find an older couple to mentor us, because we're struggling a bit in the early years of marriage. And it was blessing for both. Yeah.
I think we've great. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're ready for round 2, session 2 with us. So in this session, we're going to hear more from Father Stephen and the story of St. John the Baptist in Leamington Spa. So he's going to take the lead for the next 15-20 minutes-ish and talk us through what's happened there. And then we're going to go into a bit more detail about some of the young adults projects that other churches did as part of the project, that our 20s to 30s development leaders headed up, just to give some examples from different contexts. And then we're going to go back into breakout groups again. So I'm going to share screen and hand over to Father Stephen, who is going to tell us all about John the Baptist. Just let me know when you want me to move on slides.
Happy, Kim? Can I take over? Brilliant.
Yeah, go for it.
Good. So context, St. John's, when I was appointed in December 2016, St. John's had had a priest for 23 years before me. And how do I word this politically? Not a great deal was done, it has to be said. So on my first Sunday, I arrived and the front doors were closed and locked. And I said, what are you doing? He said, well, we're all here. And I said, there's 9,000 people in this parish. There's not 9,000 people in the building. We're not all here. And so ensued the last 5 years of encouraging the old guard, to use a lack of a better word, to think outside of their safety boxes and to think actually that their chief call is to worship Almighty God and to open the doors and proclaim that to the community that they're called to serve. So I arrived to a congregation of about 10, maybe 15 on a good Sunday. It really was a congregation on its last legs. And so I was made the interim priest with a remit of 3 years to engage with the wider community, to engage with the deanery. Fellow clergy colleagues in the deanery couldn't tell you what my predecessor looked like. He didn't darken the doors of chapter. Some might think that's a good thing, others disagree. And so it's not often you'll hear an Anglo-Catholic say this, but the best advice I had was from the Archdeacon at the time. And he said 2 things. He said social justice is really attractive to people in their 20s and 30s, and give it a go. And if it doesn't work, move on to the next thing, try something else. So the last 5 years have really been an opportunity to do that, to try something, and if it hasn't worked, evaluate it and simply move on to the next thing. It has to be said that the interim role in which I inhabited was quite freeing in that I had 3 years to tell the church that either we do this or there's a potential that you won't get a full-time priest at the end. I'm not endorsing that as a model, but it was a helpful model for the context in which I was in. So my appointment on the interview panel was a lady in her mid-30s called Gemma, and she had a newborn baby and a 3-year-old at the time. And I was appointed in December, and in January, just after our first Christmas together, she said, Father, I'd like to start a toddler group. We haven't got a toddler group. I'd like to start one. And so the voice of Morris, the Archdeacon, echoing in my ears, say yes. And so I did. And we started up to Little Lambs. And over the course of the last 5 years, we've had about 100 mums and toddlers and the occasional dad meet with us on a Thursday morning. And that has seen growth. And we are just now, I mean, 5 years on, we're just now beginning to see families coming to church on a Sunday morning. So it's been a long slog and it's been a hard work and commitment, but it's been an opportunity to engage with young families that otherwise we wouldn't see. They'd have walked past the doors and not thought that they could come in. Kim, can you move to the slide over, please? Oh, there we are. Lovely. Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you. And from our little lambs, from our preschool toddler group on a Thursday, young mums and dads said, well, can we do something in the summer holidays? They would volunteer for it. They'd help run it. And so we set up a summer club, which we have run every year now since I've been here. And I wouldn't be able to do it if it weren't for the young mums and dads who were wanting it and willing to engage with it. And if it wasn't for a simple yes in the January of 2017, it wouldn't have happened. I'm very lucky, it has to be said, that my PSO, my parish safeguarding officer, is superb, and she keeps everyone in line and keeps us all up to date with safeguarding procedures, and I would be lost without that. But once again, that's a woman in her 30s and is very competent and is very skilled in what she does, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. If you want to go through the slides again, please, Kim.
Yeah. How's that?
Still showing the first one, but it'll get there. The next one's
Summer
just
Club.
a picture
Is that
again
right?
of Summer Club.
Rocky's Place?
Yeah. It's fine. I'll talk. It'll happen eventually. So in my second year, I was out the back of the hall on which I'm sat in at the moment, and I was burning some cardboard boxes with the lay reader, as you do on a Saturday morning. And around the side of the hall ran 3 teenagers from the local estate and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, well, we're burning some rubbish that we don't need anymore. And they said, "Can we hang out?" And once again, that voice of the Archdeacon, say yes, try it. That happened, and we said yes. And they asked if there's anything that we can do to help, or is anything we can come to. And myself and the lay reader looked at one another and said, yes, if you come on Friday, we'll run a youth group for you. And we did. And whilst this isn't strictly 18 to 30s, you've got to think that 3 years ago, I said, yes, I now have consent forms for over 100 children from the 2 estates that my church serves. And a lot of them are now on the cusp of being 17 and 18. And they're asking me, what are we going to do now that we're 18? What will happen to us? And so a whole conversation around, what's the word I'm after? About young adult provision and young adult groups for them and what that will look like has started to happen. I'm still on the first slide, Kim. Oh, no,
Right,
on the
okay.
second
I'm
slide
on,
now.
I think I'm one ahead of you. I'm on servers now.
Yay,
Sorry.
servers, excellent. So
We're on Rocky's Place.
from that youth group, we've also grown our serving team, plugging back into the idea that children and young adults like to be involved. And so we've got a number of teenagers who now serve regularly, who are in their late teens. If you go to the next slide, Kim, I'm hoping that's the right order. We'll have a look. Yeah, there we are. Some of my teenage boys serving at a midweek service. There's the old saying that the child holds the candle and the candle holds the child. But that's true of any context. That if you give someone responsibility or role, that will hold them, that they will feel valued and useful and engaged. It's not all been service-based. As Kim said, social activities are really important for what we've done at St. John's. And so I said at the start of this morning's talk that we have the highest density of 18 to 30s in the county in South Leamington. That's a quirk because of where the campus is at Warwick. So Warwick is a campus university, and in your first year you live on campus, and in second year you decamp into my parish into South Leamington. That's great. There's a captive audience of 20 to 30s. The great challenge that we have as a church is most of these students have already found a church family to belong to. And so they're not arriving in South Leamington unchurched. So we run a number of alpha courses. We have run meet and greets. We've done lots of open invitations, and that's borne some fruit. That idea of experimenting and just giving it a go and seeing if it works has paid off. I've not seen huge returns for that time and energy, but I have seen a handful of students who have settled on St. John's and made that their home. Lay leadership, as we have grown over the last 5 years from a rather small and prayerful community of 10 to about 50 now on a Sunday, we've seen a lot of young people in their 30s join us who want to do things. And one of the great triumphs, I suppose, of lay leadership has been our Taizé service. And I have nothing to do with that, but it's wonderful. Monthly, a group of young men and women set up on a Tuesday night, and they meet and they play instruments and they sing chant from Taizé. And I, every now and then, will pop in to make sure they're all right and happy, but it's completely lay-led and was completely driven by their desire to do something. And that is something that they gift to the wider town. It's an ecumenical thing, and that they invite people from other churches to come along to. And that's been really well received by them. What else I want to say to you? There's an app called Meetup, and it's a good thing that you type in the right thing, because Kim is nodding knowingly. If you type in a different thing, Meet Me, completely different app. Don't go on to Meet Me. Meetup is a wonderful app because it allows you to advertise events you're doing in your church, and it's used by a younger generation. And I will shamelessly admit that I have stolen ideas from members in the Accelerate group who run a games night in Warwick. And just before lockdown, we started advertising a games night here at St. John's, a monthly games night. And our first night, we had 10 people. And so it's a really useful tool to be advertising what you're doing and what events you're putting on, particularly in a targeted way to a younger audience. So that's been very helpful for us. It hasn't all been clean sailing, it has to be said. Very early on, I had an ambitious and noble aim of merging charismatic worship with Anglo-Catholic worship. And we started something called the Evening Mass, the idea being that that might appeal to a wider audience in their younger years. And it flopped. Best way in the world, I had a very good team of musicians, and it just didn't work. For whatever reason, the spirit wasn't blowing in that direction. And that's fine, that's okay. We tried something, we thought we had a good idea, and it either just wasn't the time or was the wrong context. But that's really helpful for me to be able to say that we tried it, we gave it a go, and not to be disheartened by the fact it didn't work. Because lots of other things we have done and tried have been successful. Over the past year, St. John's has been giving out food 5 days a week as part of a food kitchen. I think we've given out, well, thousands of meals now. It's ridiculous, really. But the engagement of young families who want to provide food, who have messaged the church, who aren't connected to the church, and gone, how can we engage with this? How can we help? And that resonates what Archdeacon Morris said about social justice being attractive and appealing. And it's been a really good opportunity for St. John's, both to serve the poorest in our community and those most in need, but also to tease out conversations with people who want to be supporting that work, and to say to them, we're doing this because we love Jesus. We're doing this because Jesus tells us to feed the poor. And then to invite them to a deeper conversation. And it's still early days of that, because lockdown has meant we've not been able to meet and do things. But a number of those who have volunteered or asked about helping have attended online Zoom socials and have started to plug in, at least on the edges of the wider community here at St. John's. As a really brief and quite concise snapshot of what's happened here, at least in this context, over the last 5 years. Where I said everything. Yes, I think it is.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think it's fair to say that some of the kind of points of learning from you guys are, like you've mentioned, is giving things a go, not being afraid to give things a try. And it's okay if that doesn't quite work out the way that you thought it might, but we've tried it and we've learned from it. And also making the most of opportunities that present themselves before you. So, you know, when the teenagers came around the back of the hall and wanted to help you burn stuff, that has grown into the youth group that you've got. So I think those are probably the two of the key things that we've learned from having St. John the Baptist and you as part of the Accelerate team. Yeah, it's good. Thank you for sharing. I'm sure if people have questions, then feel free. I'm just setting them up here, but feel free to put them in the chat to Father Stephen if there's further things you want to know about how young adults could work, or ministry with young adults works in the Anglo-Catholic tradition. Then feel free to pop those in the chat.
Everything that's happened at St. John's is, you know, you could do it in any context. Nothing that I've said is particularly unique to an Anglo-Catholic setting, other than maybe carrying candles at midweek service. Saying yes and being adaptable and listening to where the Spirit's blowing. That's true of every context in which we're serving.
Right. Thank you for sharing. Thank you very much. Right. We're going to, I think this is frozen again. There you go. Going to carry on just giving a few more examples of things that the team tried over the last few years, and with various degrees of success, but most of these ones are success stories. I'm going to kind of rattle through these fairly quickly and give a bit of context to each of the churches so that you know kind of a little bit more about them. So St. James is a fairly large church, conservative, evangelical, just outside of Coventry city. So just on the edge of walking distance for the Cov Uni students. They just about made it there. But one of our 20s and 30s development leaders was placed into St. James Church, and has done a whole load of great work there. One of the things that he started after being at the church for a couple of years, so he'd been based at the church and then started an evening service. And some of the key points of this evening service were that it's young adult led. So he'd been working with some of the young adults to encourage their skills, encourage their gifts for a number of years. And so it wasn't a kind of straight in start leading a service, but there'd been quite a lot of leadership development going on in the background. The service, as you could imagine, had a more contemporary, hence the lights and the palettes and the fake plants that you can see in this, and the rug as well. So the way it kind of looked was very contemporary, but obviously the style of worship was quite contemporary as well. One of the most beautiful things about this service was the support that the wider church gave the evening service. So starting a new service which has the focus of, or the intention of having young adults to it, can look like a bit of a separate group, and a bit of a separation out from the family of the church. And we, with everything that we've done, we've tried to manage that quite carefully. So there's a need for, like we've mentioned before, there's a need for young adults to have their own space, but also feel part of the whole church family. But the support that the wider church gave this service was great. So some of them, some of the guys that had led worship for a number of years in the church came and supported the band, and came and did tech support and made drinks and all sorts of stuff. So seeing that support was amazing. So St James evening service, that's something that has run really well for quite a while. Hopefully, has that moved on to Urban Hope? Can you see it? Have I still got a lag with slides?
I have now.
Okay, great. So Urban Hope is a city centre BMO in Coventry, mostly working with people who struggle with social and financial difficulties. So they have almost all young adults as well, but there are some people there of different ages. But the family group came about because there's a lot of young single parents that come and join in with the work of Urban Hope. And Bex, one of our workers at the church there, realised that starting a small group in its traditional sense wasn't going to work for her young adults. So everyone else in our team was saying, small groups is a great way, we're all starting small groups for young adults. And she was sort of getting increasingly frustrated because she realised that with the number of young parents that she had, or she was working with, it just wasn't going to work. So started family group. So family group meets once a month on a Friday tea time. They've actually just started up again, so they've been able to start meeting again, having moved online for last year. But pre-COVID, once a month on a Friday tea time-ish, children and their parents were at the group, and other adults from the church were putting on activities for the kids to do, whilst the parents were able to have just a really short, really simple Bible study, pray together. So it's a pretty chaotic group, and just due to the numbers of people there and the wide variety of ages, from very, very young children that are there. So it's quite chaotic, but brilliant as well, to try doing a small group for parents and children. That the picture you see is the guys from Urban Hope. So right at the front is Bex with a pink t-shirt on. That's our 2030s development leader at Urban Hope. So these are pictures of stuff that we have, which is good. So yeah, family group, just again very different, and we've learned a lot through doing that. Student ministry obviously does make up a fair part of the work that we've been doing. So 2 of the 2030s development leaders were based in churches that would probably most naturally attract students. So we've got Coventry University and Warwick University within our diocese. And I've put this picture up because it's basically the last thing we managed to do before lockdown, as you'll see on the dates. So there was a young adults students weekend away just before lockdown. We'd managed to sneak it in somehow. So we're quite proud of that, which is why I put the picture up. But yeah, student ministry, obviously linking in with universities, colleges. We'll go into further ways of doing that in the top tips, but the things we've learned from that: regular social events, like we've mentioned a few times, and weekends away, do work for students. But yeah, we had two of our workers really focused on this area. We could probably do a lot more about student stuff, but we'll just give a quick overview on that. Games Cafe, which is mentioned. So Father Stephen mentioned Games Cafe. One of the guys on our team started this down in Warwick. So the picture you can see, this is actually a community cafe that the church runs. So the building, the church has the building, and it's just around the church. And this is the Games Cafe. So basically, a few of the young adults kind of were trying to work out how do we reach the young adults that live near where we live, but have no connection to church at all. They realised they all quite like playing board games. and so decided to start a board games cafe. As mentioned, they use the app Meetup. Don't go on Meet Me, very different app. But the app Meetup is brilliant. It advertises local social events, and they saw a really big take up in the games cafe. Turns out in Warwick, lots of young adults like to play board games. Who knew? It got to the point where some real board game fanatics were turning up, quite often in fancy dress, which was interesting. So it just became like a real community for people that love board games, which is great. Through that, again, after a number of years, so the board games cafe the games cafe was probably running for about 2 years before a couple of the guys came along to Alpha. So they've been invited to come along to different things that are happening at the church. Yeah, by the grace of God, after a while, they decided to come along and get involved in more of the things that are happening at the church. So that's been really great, but it's taken a couple of years of building up relationships with people over things for that to happen. So that seems to be popular in Warwick. That's what. Something else that we tried over a while is doing, we call them 20s to 30s meetups. So really, really simple, just bringing together young adults from different churches. We've done them in Coventry, Leamington, and I think it was either Leamington or Warwick. I can't remember where you guys did yours.
Yeah, Leamington.
Leamington, right. And again, this was quite a kind of social, just getting young adults together, because we've realised that, we've knew this for a while, but some churches have more young adults than others, and for a young adult that might be in a church where they are one by themselves or one of only a handful of young adults, they really like their church and they are faithful to it and they want to serve that church, but wouldn't mind meeting up with some other young adults from different churches. So this has more of a social feel, but is sharing experiences of churches as well. And we've found out quite a lot about what's going on with young adults in churches outside of our team from doing 20s to 30s meetups, which is great. Obviously, we're on hold for the last year, but we started to do these semi-regularly, maybe once every month, once every couple of months. So those have worked really well for us. I think this might be the final one, but the collective. So this was an idea by one of the guys on the team who really wanted to create a space.
Oh, have we lost Kim?
We have lost Kim.
I'm so sorry. Am I back?
Oh, she's back.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. I was about to ask
sorry.
Stephen to busk it, but if you're back, then you carry on.
So can you still see the screen as well? I need to share screen again.
You've lost your slides, I think. What you
Right,
could do,
that's okay.
Kim, if you close your camera down, that might help your bandwidth. I don't know if that's worth doing for this last bit.
Okay.
I mean, we're getting the message,
yeah.
but you look much clearer now. Yeah, that's much clearer. Fire away.
Great. Maybe I just need brilliant. So I didn't realise it wasn't there. I'm so sorry. I did think I might be having issues today. So are we on the collective? Is that what you can see now?
Yeah, we are.
Is that the slide that one? Brilliant, thank you. So the collective, one of the guys on our team had a real heart for creating a space that was not in one of our church buildings, and was very accessible to people that have no connection to church at the moment. So the collective came out of a few conversations with other members of diocesan staff as well. So this isn't purely an Accelerate endeavour, but it came into being, which is great. So this picture is taken from the collective in a cafe in the city centre called Esquires, which is inside the Transport Museum. If you know Coventry at all, that's where that is. And just really wanted to say, make a space that young adults could invite their friends to. There's a topic each month. So it could be, I think in February, we looked at love. in around Valentine's Day, obviously December, looked at kind of Christmas and Advent. What does that mean? It's very accessible. There's a quiz, there's a talk. We've had an open mic night as well, and then just questions on table to kind of get discussions started. So the collective has been really good. Again, has been on pause for last year, but started off well, and we're starting to see good numbers of people come along to that. So the collective and the 20s to 30s meetups, those are kind of, they're definitely more evangelistic in their approach, so more invitational and more bring people along, which all are really, but and out being outside the building as well, so kind of spreading into different venues other than our church buildings. So that is the collective. I'm just going to check the time and see.
There's been a lot of questions coming in, Kim.
Oh, there. Okay. I haven't looked at the chat, so shall I have a look at the questions and then go into? We've actually got a couple of minutes before we go into breakout groups, so let's just have a quick look at these questions and see. Okay, what does games night involve? Hopefully we've answered that one. Bringing along board games. That's yeah. Does the app bring in people with no previous church connection? Yes, pretty much everybody that has joined from Meetup has no connection to church at all. So it's people that are living in an area looking for social things to do. So in no way is it a dating, I know we joked about it, in no way is it a dating app. It is, if I had an interest in knitting, I would go on Meetup and put in local knitting groups, and it would show what's there, and you can book in through the app. So yeah, it's definitely a kind of find out what's happening in your local area, and you can message the host as well, so you can obviously find out a little bit more about what's going on. But yeah, pretty much everyone that came through Meetup had no connection to church at all. What else have we got? Board games, yeah, board games, massively popular. Games Cafe, yeah. I need to start playing board games. I don't play them at all. Yeah, yes. So I'm just scrolling through the questions really quickly. A recent Tier Fund survey showed that environmental issues are important to younger people. We are seeing a growing interest in forest church. Is this something that has featured in your work? In terms of environmental issues, one of the clergy on our team, she is Vicar of Church down in Southam, and she, with a number of young adults, has started an environmental group down there. So again, coming out of conversations with young adults for whom this is a massive topic, and they wanted to do something about it. Yes, they started an environmental group. And do all kinds of things in town. Now. Sorry?
Don't they have the Church of England Gold Award for Environmental Church?
Yeah. I think they might do. Yeah.
We're certainly working towards it.
Yeah. There you go. So I'm trying to read through these questions to go through. I will have a look at these questions while people are in breakout groups, and we'll see if we can pick some up afterwards. Sorry about that. So I think we're going to go into breakout groups. We're going to have slightly longer this time. So you have about 15 minutes. And the questions that we're going to look at are, what does our church offer that would appeal to young adults? And are we fostering participation amongst our young adults and encouraging them into leadership positions within the church? So I'll put those questions in the chat. And yeah, I think.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll send people off into groups then, and yeah, slightly longer, 10 to 15 minutes this time. Just what's rung bells and what would work, what are you doing, what appeals. I'll see the questions there from Kim. I'll send you all off and call you back in due course. Are the questions going into the chat?
I'll put them in now. Yeah.
There we are. They're just landing now.
you go.
Does our church offer that would appeal? And are we fostering participation and encouraging leadership positions among our young adults? Okay, we'll send you off and see you in a bit. Okay, I think we're back again. Over to you again, Father Stephen and Kim.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, so we've got about 10 minutes just for feedback and questions. We'd also be really interested to hear about things that you guys have tried or things that you've got working as well with your young adults. So good stories of practice that you've has worked for you guys. So again, if you're able to use the raise your hand function, that's probably the easiest way for us to see. So we'll take feedback and questions. Yeah.
John Marsh, I see, has got a physical hand raised. Let's go over to you, John, just to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Thanks, Kim. Just thinking about connecting with young adults through life events, so baptism, prep, and marriage courses. One possible way of doing that is to run maybe marriage courses, marriage prep courses, twice a year, rather than doing it for individuals. Run them twice a year. Get groups of couples together, make it a bit of a social occasion, and do that way. So you can kind of generate a sense of they're not just coming to the church for their one-off wedding, but they're coming to something that's a community event, and get people in their 20s and 30s to run that, whoever you've got in their 20s and 30s, maybe newly married people, to run that. And the same, again, you could do that with baptism, but also I think there's probably an appetite in some areas for parenting courses, and there are a lot of off-the-shelf parenting courses that you could offer. So Ian Parkinson, Ian and Nadine run a thing called Family Time, and Ian's now in our diocese, so there may be parenting courses, and do the same thing, run them with young young mums and dads leading that. There may be two ways in.
Yeah, definitely. Father Grant, I think you got your hand up.
Yeah.
Go.
So I just want to say it's been really encouraging this morning, and thank you for sharing. I know I've come across both of your guys' work before. I've always been really encouraged by the team as well that you've formed there in Coventry. Seems to be really good. One of the things I'd just like to ask you about is where you see teaching falling within this. So we've developed a student ministry here, which is increasingly popular. Actually, sometimes the social side of things has been really hard to form as a group. Sometimes they've been really faithful in terms of work and engage stuff, but actually trying to get the group to form, it really began to form. You got students within that group, so that's been of real benefit. But I just got opinions on where teaching forms within this. We've done quite a bit of it on pilgrimages and stuff like that, so actually when we've taken people away. But where do you see the best place to cite that, or is it more in terms of getting people involved in action when you're discipling them?
Good question. Do you want to take that one?
Thank you, Kim. I think by belonging to a worshiping community, you get teaching in the Sunday service, in the preaching slot. For us, small groups have been a really big boom. Actually, it's not often you'd hear, I suppose, an Anglo-Catholic church having small groups, but we have 2 small groups that meet once a week and work their way through the Bible. And because Best in the World, my congregation isn't the most theologically literate, and I say that with love and tenderness, but lots of them are new Christians, and so lots of the terms that I would use naturally just isn't common parlance for them. And so we've taken time between books of the Bible to do a theology study. And we use that very good book by, his name's completely slipped my mind, An Introduction to Christian Theology by Alistair McGrath. And just pick a chapter, and we've worked our way through that over the last couple of years. And they've really enjoyed that, particularly because McGrath offers questions at the end, so they haven't got to be too creative. They can just use the questions provided. And that's been quite a secure and comforting and safe way for them to engage and to be liberated and to, enable them, in this context at least, to be taught and to learn themselves, to self-teach, which has been really nice to watch.
Yeah, I'd echo small groups as well. I think small groups we found to be a really valuable space for asking questions and answering questions. And in terms of discipleship, like I mentioned earlier, those one-to-one interactions, so going for a coffee, grabbing some lunch, there's been a lot of value in those conversations as well. So we found the one-to-one mentoring has been a really good place for kind of more personal discipleship, I'd say as well. Good.
One of the things, Stephen, just to come back to a point that you made about Anglo-Catholic Church and small groups, is that we've started to intentionally try and use our devotional societies and guilds as small groups. So I know you've got serving guilds now, and so we try and use that on people within the group to share the teaching. Very good. I like the pen. So that's been quite useful as well, and with CBS and Society of Mary as well.
I think they are very different in our context. So we have a very active guild here. We've got Society of Mary and Our Lady of Walsingham, but they are meeting for a particular intention that I think is very different to a more evangelical style of small group. And so our Bible small group meets together and we spend about half an hour just talking and praying for each other. And that's a lot that it's more free flowing than I would say a Catholic devotional group is. Now, I'm not denigrating Catholic social groups. So, they're really important to building up our common life together in Christ and fostering a devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, to Jesus Christ, and all of that. But it's a different intention. Small groups in the more evangelical strain of thought are much more about understanding the Bible more and fellowship and praying for one another. And so it's both and. I think a good church has both, wherever a good church is, if I can use that term.
Thank you. Can we go to Beth next, and then we've got a question in the chat from Phil. So let's go Beth, who's raised her hand, and then I'll answer Phil's chat and questions.
Thank you, first of all. It's been really good to hear about your ministries this morning. And as you've been talking, I think for me it's raised a lot of connecting points with some research I did amongst young adults a couple of years ago. And I just wanted to kind of offer that. It's called Authentic Faith. And it looks at the different types of ministries with young adults and looks at some of the things that you've said, but develops a typology. So looking at how growth and discipleship happens. And it's much wider than just Sheffield Diocese, but it does have 3 examples from Sheffield Diocese in it. So people might want to have a look. So I'll put a link to it in the chat if people are interested.
Great, thank you. We're very much speaking from our Coventry Diocese context and haven't done much outside of that. So yeah, wider context, that's brilliant. If you pop the link in the chat, that would be great. Thank you very much. Got a question in the chat from Phil. He said, please can you share more about how the small group for parents and children worked? Yes, I can. So it's called Family Group. The basic way it works is to have the parents and the children there at the same time. So it's a Friday tea time slot. I think they do have food when they could have food. I think there is food available. And then there are at least 2 members of the church that are there putting on activities for the children. So essentially eat together, and then in the same building, the building works well for this, for where they are, because there's a sort of separate, but you can see in like a separate space for sofas, and then there's a big space for children. So essentially separate out. Children have their own activities that they're running, or being run for them, sorry. They're not running them themselves. Although at one point a lot of paint ended up on the carpet, and I got a panicked phone call from the worker saying, how do we get paint out of the carpet? To which I didn't know the answer. We moved the snooker table and put it on top, it's fine. So there's children's activities happening at the same time as essentially a small group going on for the parents. So again, they found that on a Sunday morning it was difficult for the parents of the very young children to be concentrating fully in the service. So that's essentially how it works. So intentional children's work and a small group. So that probably runs for 15 minutes maximum. Maybe you've got 15, possibly 20 minutes with the separated out groups. So it's very intentional Bible study and prayer.
That's quite a short time then, isn't it? That's not trying to make it longer. That's really quite, yeah. Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah. I mean, so as I mentioned, the families that attend Urban Hope, they experience a wide variety of social issues, economic issues, and difficulties. And so time is difficult sometimes. Transport is difficult as well. So Bex and the others will give lifts to people and will try and get them there. So there's a number of reasons why the time frame is short, but they have also done quite a few outdoor activities as well over the last year. So they've been able to do meeting up in the park and going to different places. But generally on a Friday evening, the tea time, that it would be meet together, all have food together, then like 2 separate groups in the same building is basically how that works. But we can. I mean, Bex would be really, really happy to talk to you if you want to know any more about how it works. Then do get in touch, and we can put you in touch with her. So, yeah. I can't see any more hands up, but do we have any more?
It's about break time anyway. So okay. Shall we go for the next break there? Thanks very much. There's a lot of good stuff there to chew on, and thank you for all the sharing of resources. That's a real bonus that's going on in the course of the meeting and the chat and stuff. Yeah, quarter of an hour and then come back just after 12. People okay with that?
Ready? We have got about another 20-25 minutes. What we're going to do in a minute is go through a list of our top tips from our team to you. So these are things that have been tried and tested throughout our time, the last 5 to 6 years. Things we've done. We sat down as a team a while ago and put together this list. So they've worked, some successfully, some better than others, but in a wide variety of contexts. I know we keep saying that, and lots of different churches. So there's actually 30 top tips, and then what we're going to do is we've got a bit more time for questions. So if there are any further questions about anything we've shared this morning, then we can do that. So I'm going to share my screen again. Really hope I stay put this time and don't disappear. Sorry if we do. Steve and I are going to do one slide each. So we're going to do alternate slides, but a lot of this is stuff that we've covered, but it's just really practical advice, which say take or leave any part that might be useful to you. But young adults who use their gifts and talents at church, really key, really, really key. And we give this, a lot of this stuff isn't specific to young adults as well. We found it works with young adults, but a lot of it is just useful advice for outreach and encouraging participation amongst all different ages. But gifts and talents at church, really great. Running a variety of social events, again, we've mentioned this. Seems to work really well for young adults. They enjoy spending time together, enjoy doing different things together. Linking your church with student organisations such as Fusion and Student Christian Movement. There are others as well. Again, there's various different ways that you can do this. One of the simplest and one of the most straightforward is just getting your church listed on their database. So as a student in Sheffield, I know how great the churches there are. And I know that I looked at Fusion, especially before joining the university and starting in the city, and had a look at the different churches. Again, even if you think your church might not be one that students would go to top of the list, get it on the websites anyway. Make sure that you're on the radar for students if you're within decent walking / travel distance. But both websites are really great to use and to link in with them. Maintaining a decent church website sounds quite straightforward, but young adults especially will have looked at your church before they come and do anything at your church. So they definitely would have Googled you, definitely would have had a look to see what you look like. So as an example, this week at my church, the church I go to, which is not a big church, it's just outside Coventry city centre. We're fairly middle of the road. But we do have a good website, and we've had a couple come and say we'd like to have our marriage. They got married abroad, but they want to have their marriage blessed at our church, and they picked us because we've got the best website of all the local churches, and ours isn't particularly fancy, but it just looks good. So there's a bit of value in putting a bit of time and effort into your church website. Consider alternative locations for meetings, such as local cafes. And we've done quite a lot of stuff just in local cafes. It can just break down a barrier there for coming into a church building, if that is something for people that they might find hard. Then having small groups or doing social things, we're doing one-to-one kind of discipleship stuff in local cafes, we would recommend. All right, over to you, Stephen. Next slide.
Thank you. I don't think you need to say any more about board cafes. We've spoken a lot about board games. But free food, particularly for students, is always very warmly welcome and received. I remember being a student and not being able to budget very well. And so if a church was offering me free grub, I was there. So that's something to bear in mind. Collaborate with community sport groups. That's really important, getting involved with people around you. I know the churches in Leamington have a football team competition and involve local football teams. That's really good and helpful. Think about when you're doing your services, because students, bless them, often have nights out, and so a 10 a.m. or a 9:30 a.m. service isn't always student friendly or hangover friendly, and then you might just not be awake at that time. So afternoon and evening slots are really useful to consider, whether or not that's just a better time that fits into their diaries and their lifestyle. And we've mentioned how we advertise things using apps like Meetup, being active on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. These are really useful tools for increasing your evangelical net.
Yeah. So one of the things we suggest as well is that if you are running something like Messy Church, then you have one of your volunteers just specifically there to talk to the parents. So any sort of children's group that's running or family event, quite often we focus our attention on the crafts and the games and the songs and making sure the children are all doing what they should be doing. But we would recommend having a floaty round volunteer that can just have a cup of tea and sit and chat to the parents, ask how your week's been, how are they doing. So being intentional with linking in with the parents or grandparents, guardians, whoever's there, but whatever setting, maybe don't just focus on the children, but have someone to talk to the parents as well. At my church, we started a family film club. So we were given some grant funding to get some film equipment. And on a Sunday afternoon, once a month, ran a family film club. So showed whatever the latest Disney Pixar film was that came out. And that got quite a lot of interest lately. We did do a Friday evening community film club as well. So that's something that worked for us in our context. It might not work everywhere, but we found that to be quite good. Home groups, we've talked a lot about home groups. We can't recommend that enough. Social action as well. Young adults really do care about their community, they care about the world, and they care about issues of justice. So anything kind of social action, recommend doing that as well. And boosting events and posts on Facebook. So possibly paying for like advertising. if church has a Facebook page, which I imagine pretty much everyone does now with live streaming and sharing services. But yeah, boosting posts and events on Facebook, they will go more widely than the people that just like your church's Facebook page. So we'd recommend doing that as well. There you go. On to the next one.
Trying to run alternative services. And so it's about thinking outside the box. What you do on a Sunday morning will work for the congregation there, but in terms of accessibility, that might always be the case, particularly for an unchurched generation, where what we do normatively on a Sunday morning may not make sense whatsoever. So cafe church, message church, Taizé services that are simpler and easier access are certainly things worth considering. For those of you who have lots of baptism weddings, they are fantastic opportunities for you to make connections with young families. It has to be said, in my context, funerals are the great missional device that the Lord has provided St. John's. Of all the occasional offices, funerals have been the most impactful way of growing new disciples for myself. Think about the aesthetics of your meeting space. We live in a generation and a world where what things look like is incredibly important to younger people. If you're wearing the right trackies or the right branded thing. So what we make our spaces look like, if they're appealing and attractive, is really important. It also speaks to how we are valuing those people who are coming. If we've just thrown something together and it's dirty and shabby, that's going to reflect badly on what we think of things. Social media coming up again. These top tips will repeat themselves because these are top tips from the entire group of 10. But young generation live on their phones. I mean, my phone's here because the idea that I might be away from it at 33 is terrifying. You think a younger generation, they're even more wedded to social media. And so if the church will be active and present there, that's really important that we can engage in that way. And connect with other churches running young adult ministry. There'll be churches in your deanery, in your town, in your diocese who are doing the work. And it's really good just to pick up the phone when we're allowed to, go for a coffee and talk things through, work out what's working for them and seeing if that might work in your context. I'm very lucky that in Leamington, there's something called Thrive, and they do a lot. And so we work closely with them.
Great, thank you. So talk to your young adults, ask young adults what they value about your church and ideas that they have for the future. So again, people quite often say to me, we just don't know what the young adults want from church. And I say, have you asked them? And they go, no, we haven't tried that. So really would recommend having a conversation with your young adults and just say to them, what is it about this church that you really appreciate? What are the things that you really like? What are the things that you think we could look ahead to do? So just have those conversations, just have those chats with young adults. Yeah, also, again, spending time building relationships with parents at parent and toddler groups. So I mentioned that about the Messy Church as well, but being intentional about talking to the parents, really, really key. Prayer walk around the parish, get to know your patch, get to know where people are, and pray hard for the areas. If you've got local schools, if you've got colleges, higher education colleges or anything like that in your parish, or sports clubs, whatever you've got, go and pray over those spaces and go and pray for the people that are using those spaces, cafes, shops, everything. Pray hard and prayer walk. So we've talked about universities and fusion and student Christian movement, but making connections with Christian unions at local colleges as well can also be really valuable. So from sixth form colleges or any sort of kind of post-16 colleges, then if they have got a chaplain or they've got a Christian union, then offer your services to them and see if you can, even if it's just what can we pray for you guys, then pray and make connections there. Fly the parish, this is actually something that St. John the Baptist have done quite well. So it's feels like a bit of an old school approach, but it has still actually worked.
Oddly, through flying the parish,
for you guys, definitely.
we've had probably more engagement than on social media, as we said. Thinking about it, yeah. We were quite targeted because you could ask for HMOs, you can ask where the student housing is, and you can target student housing with flyers, and that was really good. And we were able to have a number of conversations on doorsteps with people and build relationships that way. So rather than flying 9,000 people, we fly 2,000.
This is our final slide of top tips. Do you want to take this one?
It didn't move over. Right, there we are. Right, invest in children's ministry, as this also grows the parents' faith. I think we need to be really intentional about investing in people and investing in our ministries. And if we want to see our churches with young people and young children, we need to intentionally set out to invest in that. And that means having in our PCC meetings that this is what we're going to do, putting into the DNA of our church that we're a church that invests in this. Post events on online community forums. Another app that we found very useful is Nextdoor, which is once again a local app for people in the community who will use it and log on. I'm forever being bombarded about notifications about lost cats, but it's really useful to tell people about what's going on at church, particularly for those who live on the street you're on or on the neighbouring streets. Start a community or gospel choir. I can't speak into that from St. John's, but I gather it's worked for some in the team.
Other people have managed.
We have started a new choir at St. John's actually, and that's been quite good at growing. It's not a gospel choir. Find out where your 20s and 30s are in your community. A lot of the time we expect them to come to us, and if they're unchurched, that might not even cross their mind to do. So if we can be a loving presence where they are, and if that's in the pub, so be it. If that's in a local community centre, we need to be there and be a living and witnessing presence to them. And I think most importantly, the best tip we can ever give you is to not stop praying. Surround everything you do in prayer. Offer it up to the Trinity, give it to Jesus Christ, and you'll succeed.
Yeah, we have spent a lot of time praying on our monthly team meetings. Pray hard for the young adults that we encounter, and we give all credit and all thanks to God for the good things that we've seen over the last few years. But yeah, keep praying. That brings us to the end of our top tips. So those are tried and tested methods from various members of the team. So hopefully there might be one or two things in there that are ideas that might be useful for you in your context. Yes, we've got, I think, about 5 to 10 minutes.
And I'll hand over to Bishop Pete to take us on from here with, I think, Rick doing the reading.
Thank you, Bill. And I'd just like to add a word of appreciation of my own to Kim and Father Stephen. Thank you. That's been a really encouraging morning. I don't know quite how you've managed it, but it's both been immensely simple and practical, but also envisioning and just spiritually uplifting. So thank you very much for that. It's always helpful to me, interesting to me to monitor the chat. And the extent of appreciation this morning's been really palpable. So thank you for giving us your time. Those of you who are used to leading well and my own contributions will know that I do try to find a biblical passage which will relate to the subject. And of course, on this occasion, younger adults, I was really quite spoilt for choice, because I could have gone for Samuel or David or Jeremiah, almost certainly the Blessed Virgin Mary, or someone much more anonymous, like that little slave girl who plays such a significant part in the story of the healing of Naaman, for example. And if you just scan those examples, one of the things that emerges is just how unlikely God's choices are. David, the youngest of those 7 brothers. Jeremiah, absolutely not at all convinced that he was well placed to accept the vocation that God was placing on him. Mary, an unmarried mother, and so on. But I went with Joseph because I think that's where God's risk is most palpable. God seems to me prepared to take extraordinary risks in his readiness to call younger adults to his service and to leadership in his work. So I'm going to pray, and then I'll get Rick to read Genesis 37, 1 to 11. And if you happen to have the handout which was circulated beforehand to hand, that might be helpful for you. Let's pray. Loving God, would you now send us, as you are always so ready to do, the help of your Holy Spirit to enable each one of us to hear the word that you would speak to us in Jesus our Lord. Amen.
Time for reading. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because he was a son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. He had another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I've had another dream. The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this you've had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
I find I have some sympathy for Joseph's brothers. I don't know how the story strikes you. Joseph is born into a dysfunctional family and is favorited by his father. And the first 4 verses spell out the dysfunction of the family and the really unwholesome impact that it has on the family dynamics, that Joseph is treated so much as the special one. And then verses 5 to 8a and 9 to 11, or 8b to 11, I think reveal Joseph to be something of a spoilt brat and a show-off who lives out his experience of being favorited by his father. And yet that doesn't exclude him either from receiving spiritual gifts, these inspired dreams from God, or in the fullness of time, emerging into an outstanding leader among God's people. I just want to trace that trajectory with you a little bit further. So Jacob favorites Joseph, and you'll remember that Jacob's own experience was of being favorited by his mother and absolutely not favorited by his father, and that dynamic is playing itself out into the next generation. And he doesn't just favorite Joseph, but he does it in really visible, I mean, how tactless to give this son, one of the younger sons, not, you'll remember, absolutely the youngest son, that was Benjamin, So Joseph is not the only son of Jacob's old age. You wonder how Benjamin wonders how he gets overlooked in that favoriting exercise. But he gets this this long robe with colourful robe with long sleeves, and visibly walks around, parades this dysfunctional family dynamic. And Joseph has internalized this experience of being favorited, and we're told in verse 2, brought a bad report of them to their father. And I ponder that phrase because the biblical text offers us no evidence that the brothers were behaving badly. And even if they were, Joseph had a choice to make about what he was going to do with the impression that he formed. It seems to me it's quite possible he's making up this bad report, that this is one of the ways in which his favoritism plays out. He's certainly trying to shore up his own position in his father's affections by playing back this bad report to their father. So by the time you get to the end of that first paragraph, you wouldn't want the brothers to respond by hating Joseph. You would want them to be able to speak peaceably to Joseph, which they can't do. But I find I can understand how this dynamic is playing out for all of them. And yet, as we go into the middle paragraph, Joseph is the recipient of spirit-inspired dreams. But he had choices to make about what he did with those dreams, and he chooses to tell his dreams to his brothers, even though the dreams clearly mark him out as the special one, and these older brothers in particular, in this first dream, it's not a very subtle dream. These sheaves bow to Joseph's sheaf, and you can understand the brothers' resentment that this fuels their hatred of him more and more. So verse 4, they hated him. Verse 5, they hated him even more. And at the end of verse 8, so they hated him even more. Joseph is at this point in his life not a quick learner. Relating his first dream to his brothers has not gone well. He then gets this second dream, a slightly more elaborate dream, not quite such a self-explanatory dream, in some ways an even more shocking dream, because in the interpretation of it, Jacob recognizes himself as the sun in the dream, his mother as the moon and the 11 stars. Joseph hasn't learned. He relates this even now to his father as well as his brothers, and this father who day by day favorites Joseph is nevertheless moved now to rebuke him. That's how tactless Joseph's behavior has become. Even the father who favorites him is moved to rebuke him. So you understand the jealousy that has grown up between the brothers and Joseph. And yet, as I've said in the italics at the end of the handout, it is this Joseph who lived to see the fulfillment of his visions. Here is the grace of God at work, and I want to say the risk of God at work. There was no sign that I can see in these first 11 verses of Joseph's story of the mature adult that he was going to become. No one could have seen, I don't think, in Genesis 32 in Genesis 37, that Genesis 50 would be the ultimate outcome. And I chose this reading in the end because I think it is impossible to avoid risk if you are encouraging younger adults into leadership. And many of us, I think, are probably too risk averse in the way in which we deal with that dynamic. And I just want to encourage you to consider, who are you dealing with who might be at a sort of Genesis 37 stage of their life and development, but who under God might, in the fullness of time, achieve the Genesis 50 version of themselves. One of Archbishop Justin's catchphrases is, if you cannot remember the last time you failed, you are probably not taking enough risks. I think we are risk averse, especially in our appetite to entrust new Christians and younger adult Christians with leadership in the church. And of course it follows that if you take more risks, you will fail more often, but you will also unearth a Joseph. And I want to encourage you to look out for the Genesis 50 version of those you're just encountering in their Genesis 37 version of themselves. Bill.
Thank you.